podcast. My name's Navpreet. Today I have a special guest. He's actually my cousin, Harry Mann. Uh, the reason I wanted to interview Harry today is because one, he's done a lot of independent research on Sikhi and Punjab and even parts of India as well. Um, a big reason that I'm interviewing you over some of the other academics, historians that I know is because you really took your time to do this independently, and obviously you have a big internal drive in this realm. And it kind of goes with the spirit of what I'm going for with this podcast is your thoughts kind of go against the grains. We grow up, we listen to maybe one Gyani at our Gurdwara, and a lot of that stuff it's maybe it's internalized, but more importantly or more critically, it's regurgitated in the way that it's basically told to us, or just spit at us, because we don't have a lot of time for questions, and oftentimes like even criticizing somebody in our own community, it comes with a lot of backlash, and there's a lot of fear in doing so, just because nobody wants to be shunned, especially if this is for a lot of like your parents, my parents. This is really the only circle that a lot of us have. So in order to question it, it takes a lot of courage, because you're ultimately putting those relationships at risk, and you're making those people even more vulnerable. So some of the things we're going to talk about, Harry, obviously being a descendant, or direct family from descendants of Bhagat Singh, and starting your museum, and now you have kids. I am interested in kind of how you maintain your heritage, not just with Sikhi, but being Punjabi, and what you learned about Bhagat Singh. Not obviously you have stories from your own family, but the kind of research you did, the reading you did surrounding his life and his work, and then also what you took into the museum. Obviously, there's a bunch of things you did in the museum, and like as you were just telling me earlier, what gets institutionalized is what we're going to ultimately remember. Why you chose to include some of the things you did, including six in the colonial period, and then kind of we'll jump into more of a personal life and what your plans are to do with your kids now. You have three boys, and obviously how you're going to raise them, and how they can take the heritage that you're trying to write down, and really document and move it forward to have a part in their lives. So go ahead and introduce yourself, and we'll start with Bhagat Singh.
Great, thank you very much, Navpreet. Thanks for having me here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those really interesting series of topics that we're going to discuss today. So I'll start off with the relation of Bhagat Singh. Bhagat Singh was my nanny's brother, direct relation. It's often I'll come across people who will talk about being connected, but it's kind of far.
Right.
So with that, you get the privilege of being able to talk to people who had either seen Bhagat Singh or had spent considerable time with his parents, who would have known the most context about him. So I probed those people, and in trying to understand who Bhagat Singh was and what he meant to people in India and what his impact was in the diaspora. I talked to everybody when his name would come up, so that I'd get beyond opinions and start getting to some facts and tidbits which are interesting. So I'll share a couple.
Yeah, sure.
Earlier, we had a conversation about whether Bhagat Singh was a Sikh or not, and I started off by telling you that what the definition of a Sikh at that time was different. How he would have identified would have been different. One thing about his ancestral background was that his great-grandfather was one of the big Sardars in Maharaja Ranjit Singh's kind of cantonment, and they chose not to side with the British. Everybody else who did is right now ruling Punjab in one way or another. They're part of the families who've been the scions of Punjab, who've been passing their legacies down and making sure that their kids are privileged in positions of power. Bhagat Singh's family had decided at that time that they were going to side with the rest of the country and fight the oppression. So much so, here's one fact, that my Nanni ji, her name was Jagir Kaur when she was born, but Bhagat Singh had enrolled her and her older sister, who was known as Sumitra, but her name was Prakash Kaur, into the DAV college, which is the Arya Samaji college. And the Arya Samaj had started off as a movement against the imperialism that was going on in India. So they actually didn't go to Khalsa College or put the kids into Khalsa College because Bhagat Singh's father, Arjun Singh, who was one of the first Sikhs to join the Arya Samaj, had said, these people who were part of Khalsa College are all linked in with the British and they're pushing their agenda. So when they said, your daughters are going to be the only ones who, or in this situation, your sisters are going to be the only ones who have Sikh names. Do you mind if we change their names to keep them more Arya or Vedic? And they said, sure. So they changed to Sumitra and Shakuntala. That's why you'll hear people refer to
Mhm.
my nanny as Shakuntala Benji, right? Because even I thought when I was growing up, like, how did her name become Shakuntala? But it was
Sure.
explained that was the reason. But it was because the family did not agree with the stance that Sikhs had taken during the colonial period. Because there's a lot of divine rule that occurred, and with that, different people were always trying to get into positions of power. So
So
this thing gets
just
into
not to cut you off, but something that's funny is I didn't realize that the reason why they didn't go to Khalsa College was because of, obviously the British tie with the really the ruling class in Punjab. So, given if you that context is missing, that people can turn, them changing their names into something very inflammatory for the community because if you think about it today and you have a lot of like anti or like Sikh versus Hindu rhetoric and that can be very, like I said, it can be inflammatory. So I want to thank you for mentioning that because
yeah.
I think it really takes, it's important to be in that context, but go on ahead.
Okay, so then the concept of why religion wasn't brought into play was religion in itself was a Western concept. So I'm going to just
Yeah.
give background. It's a Western concept, and it was a framework which was then projected onto India because there is a way of colonial rulers to control the masses. It was by pigeonholing them, putting them into buckets, and most people didn't fall into those buckets. I'll give you an example right now. Most people who have family, who are in Punjab, you'll have one brother who's a comrade, another one
Mm-hmm.
who's Radha Swami, and another one who is Amritari. Their personalities will almost be identical, or at least
Yeah.
they'll have the same traits which distinguish them, but they'll all get along, although they're very different in where their allegiances are. That's almost the way it always was. So religion in itself did not have that controlling factor. Here in the diaspora, it became a gurdwara, became a social center, which then also became a community center. And this will explain why I believe the museum was the next step
Yeah.
towards this progression or evolution, because what happens is people need to find a place where they fit in, and you find that through comforts of things that you're aware of and that you know. So in Bhagat Singh's time, he saw an environment where people of all backgrounds who were Indian were coming together. And that's why he was impressed by the Gatri Babbe and what they were able
Mm-hmm.
to do. I mean, in California, I think it's in San Francisco. They still have the house where it all started, and
Yeah.
like Kartar Singh Sarabha had made their way out there. He flew a plane there. He had a gun license. Majority of the people were of a farming background, so they're
Yeah,
against the grain, but going out
exactly.
of
Yeah.
California at the time. But uh, the actual milieu and composition of the Gadri Babbe also was comprised of Hindus as well. It was
Yeah. Yeah.
comprised of and Muslims. It was comprised of everybody who themselves identified with that land. But what happened was when the divide and rule happened, everybody had a carrot swung in front of them, and they started playing demographic and voting games. All these things kind of played a factor into which group of people are going to be in power and how are they going to be represented. So while all this was going on, Bhagat Singh was still from the family where they had flags going back to Maharaja Ranjit Singh's time within the family's like domain. So for him being a Sikh was just part of who he was, and he was from that land. But it didn't mean anything more than that identity politics. I mean,
Mhm.
he did cut his hair. He cut his hair to escape, but it's because it was part of a larger plan. And most of what we hear from a Sikh or Punjabi perspective was from the book autobiography of Ranveer Singh, which is also known as Jail Chittiyan in Punjabi. Now, in it, one of the first things Bhagat Singh references is Guru Tegh Bahadur Shahidi, which tells you that his mindset was one of sacrificing for a larger good, which is
Right.
what he saw uh, Sikhi being a part of. And that's what he was proud of. What he wasn't proud of was how Sikhs themselves had also become a denomination, had also become Kattar. So to him, it would have been like this foreign framework is now controlling us. And because 9/10 of the world is being controlled by this one group of people, and in his mind, it was the British,
Yeah.
what have they done everywhere? And what did he do? He had over 300 books that he was reading, and he's reading right till the end voraciously. People, the Marxist Leninists, so I'm going to say there's a bunch of people, different people who've actually hijacked his narrative. You've got the Arya Samaji, who were the predecessors to the RSS. They're practically become fascists. They're the ones who are running India right now.
Yeah.
Even that train of thought is something that was embedded in them from their colonial masters at that time. Right.
Yeah.
And it's just been that train of thought that's gone all the way through. So that's one of them. Then you got the Marxist Leninists, the comrades. Many of these were there during the Punjab, like they were there during all the agrarian movements where the locals were trying to make sure that if they've got farmland, that they're getting equal wages from the government. So as you know, from the Gadri Babbe, they were actually working with the IRA. They were working with Polish and Eastern European unions at that time to get all workers to come together to revolt against the people in power. And one thing about the trajectory, which was similar in India was controlled by small kingdoms. It was just a big mass of land with small kingdoms. Fighting wasn't racial, or fighting wasn't religious. Even if you go back to Sikh history, the way they tell it to us in the Gurdwara is incorrect, right? Part of the reason why Guru Tegh Bahadur was put in the position he was in was because of his link with Bahadur Shah, who was the son of Aurangzeb. He was against his own son because he was part of a different faction. It didn't have to do with religion per se. It had to do with power and power dynamics. So those crept into what Bhagat Singh saw as being unifying. If you actually look at his earlier works, he was actually enthralled by the anarchist mindset. And the only place at that time where you would have had uh, any success in that was that short span in Spain. And I haven't looked deeply enough to see if that was talked about much, but we do know, based on what had happened with the Gadri Babe. I'm going to give you a little fact that most people aren't aware of. When people went through Argentina up to California and
Hmm.
they started up the movement abroad, when they would come back, they actually stayed in St. Petersburg, and there was a professor in one of the major Russian cities who understood Punjabi. And what he
Mm.
did was people would come stay with him for months on end. They would then learn what the Marxist Leninist mindset was or the communist mindset. And because Punjab was an agrarian land. It was a fertile place to try it out. So they went back and they started fighting along those lines. And for the average individual, they said, okay, these people are farmers fighting for farmers. We'll join them. Hence what we're seeing right now with the farmers movement in at this single border, right? In
Yeah, that's amazing.
so it's just there was a mindset of an engagement of a community. And from a heritage perspective, this is what I find absolutely that's fascinating because what it
You
is
you
we
see
have
it play out in real life in real
in real
time.
life. And
Like,
nothing happens in a vacuum. This is why when people come
yeah,
up theological debates or what you should be doing, what you shouldn't be doing, how you should be acting, what you should be eating, how you should look. Actually, it's in many ways it's quite irrelevant.
yeah,
Now, for those people who sit there and say, well, this is how, this is what this is meant to be, it's only a perspective. You have to go into history and see what that means in that context. I'll give you an example. Certain things don't translate. Have you ever tried explaining relationships to somebody who's not Punjabi or somebody in the Western Hemisphere? You,
oh, you mean like arranged marriages or something?
I'd say just even go to Taya and Chacha.
Yeah.
You talk to anybody here, they'll say, that's my uncle, that's my older uncle, that's my uncle.
Oh, sorry. I thought you meant like intimate relationships to somebody who's non-Punjabi.
Oh, no, no, I meant it more in terms of explaining relationships and family
Relations, family relations. Yeah,
relation
it's hard.
because
I
the
was
new
trying to explain to my fiance like what our parents would be to each other, like "Kodamani, kodam," things like that. And she's just like, why? Like that's such an irrelevant relationship. But I'm like, but it's not because they're, basically like the head honchos, right? They're coming
right.
together.
And then
So
by all means, your older brother would be like a father figure. Actually, both of them,
exactly, yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah,
Whereas to their kids, you'd be like a friend because you'd be their cha-cha. But these are
exactly.
nuances which come with how culture develops, and culture is always emergent. When you try to bring it in with
Yeah.
a framework, it never really works. So what's important about this is these are all elements which make people like us who are in the diaspora different. We have a different relation to relationships. We
Mhm.
have a different relation and different meaning that we apply to how we engage. And I think that a part of a person being complete is them accepting all aspects of themselves. So where this kind of ties in now into the relationship with the museum. So
Mhm.
here in Toronto, where I live, me and a group of our friends, four of us decided we need to sit there and take all the artifacts that they've been collecting, a lot of the information that I've been researching, and come together and create an institution. And the purpose of the institution was so that we had a space outside of the Gurdwara where we can pretty much define ourselves and use it as a platform to engage with a larger community. Like you're outside of Punjab, I'm outside of Punjab. My dad was 3 when he left Punjab.
Yeah.
My kids may or may not visit Punjab. I'm saying this based on COVID and where things are right now.
Yeah.
But as generations go by, that connection back home isn't there. I've met people who are Sardars from Kenya,
Yeah.
love the idea of India, but to them, they don't really even have a desire to go because their concept of who they are was already established and minted in
Africa,
Kenya,
wherever they
Africa.
were. Yeah.
And similarly, when it comes to heritage, even me, my lens is a lens which is rooted more in the early Punjabi immigration story or early Punjabi Sikh immigration story in England and what my grandfather and my dad went through, because that's what their experience is. When I talk to other friends of mine, their dads talk about the Bind. My dad can't relate to that, but my dad and his friends talked about their towns amongst each other, and they talked about the schools they went to, et cetera, et cetera. So it was the same discussion, but just a different place, different framework. You know what I mean? And
Yeah. I see that with the conversations with my brothers now. It's obviously for us, it was Livingston, where it's largely Punjabis and Mexicans. And that's kind of what we grew up with. Obviously, hard for my dad to resonate with. He's very much I see him in his element when he's watching like what's like a Gippy Gutterwald, his movies. He just feels like he's in the movie, and it's fun to see him get excited,
Oh, that's awesome.
you know? Yeah.
And
But
for us, what we've had to do
go
is we've
ahead.
had to discover where we fit in because we haven't had
Yeah,
a framework of that. And so you talk to somebody, you talk to anybody wherever you live, they see me, Harminder Mann, but they get introduced, I get introduced as Harry Mann.
exactly.
And I'm Harry Mann, they see I'm a brown guy. And then it comes into, okay, well, where are you from? Well, I was born in England. Well, you're not really English, are you? Right? And we go to England, they're going to call you British Asian. So I'm not
Yeah,
English there. Um, and then when you talk to somebody and tell them you're Indian, you speak to anybody from India. I made the mistake of saying that I'm an NRI to a cousin of mine who's from India. And he goes, no, no, you're a POID. I'm like, great. So I've got another identity or another title I have to live up
never
to.
heard that one.
Person of Indian descent. So he pretty much said to me, you're not even Indian. So I'm like, okay, so I'm not Indian in front of the Indians. I'm not Canadian in front of the Canadians. So this kind of gives me the liberty to pick and choose what I am
Sure.
or really figure out what I am and how I am. And part of that required me to sit there and look at actually every little thing that I do and what I've kind of inherited and decide what am I going to be invested in and how am I going to go forward. That I actually got from Bhagat Singh from his writings. I like the fact that at his age he was discerning and he had an agenda, he had a mindset, he had a vision, and he was all about that vision. So for him,
Right.
that vision was greater than anything beyond him. So I'd say he transcended that aspect of the ego because of that. Now, was it in a mystical, spiritual way? No. He'd even written about that in that Why I'm an Atheist. But that got appropriated again by a lot of the comrades, who, again, I said they started off in that way. Then you've got the Sikhs who said, hey, he's from a Sikh family. His last name is Sandhu. So let's imbibe him as well. But then you get into conflicts when other people are like, oh, well, was he really a Sikh? And then the way I look at it is this: you guys can decide as much as you want who's a Sikh, who isn't a Sikh. But once you decide, let me know. So when I put my
Yeah,
$2 down at the Gurdwara, I'll decide whether I'm going to do it towards your agenda or not. You know what I
sure.
mean? Like
Yeah.
it's simple. I get what I need from reading Gurbani, and that predated any experience of meeting any sant, of anybody else's guru, uh, any jatebandi or anything that was there. The only reason I am where I am is because my experiences have built upon seeds which were there prior to me engaging
Mhm.
with much of what I've engaged with. So now, should I bring this into the Heritage
Yeah,
Museum?
yeah,
Okay,
of course.
so for myself, and this is how I'm going to bring it up, my culture was what I identified with growing up. I think you'd asked me this earlier, was what stuck out to me. So from a young age, I used to be taken to the Gurdwara and I like Prashad and I like Kheer. And I also like Bhangra. I love to dance. And that music just made me go wild. I loved it. So when Punjabi Bhangra became big, or UK Bhangra became big with the groups, and for me, I started engaging probably in the early 80s when I was about 5 or 6, because my parents would be playing AS Gong, and then whenever their friends would go to England, they'd bring back new cassettes and I'd hear the latest music. And then when I moved to Toronto, where there's a bit more of a community, I found other kids who were like me who listened to the same groups. And I remember somebody saying, Apna Sangeeta, you know who they are? I thought I was the only kid who knew who they were. And then all of a sudden, I found some similarity, some likeness. And then it developed into something more and more. And then I moved to the States in North Carolina, where I was isolated. And that was the only thing, that and Gurdwara were the things that I kind of carried with me. So as
Yeah.
time went on, you evolved, you grew. This gets to the question about university. You end up becoming more entrenched in who you are and who you want to be. So you end
Yeah.
up doing research. So time went on, and I went through a religious phase, I went through spiritual phases, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, but what is it that I want to take forward? Because by the time I'd left university, the flavor of Punjabi music had changed. It went back to being more desi. Everything was coming out of Punjab. The people listening were less people from my generation, unless uh, unless their families were inclined in that direction. And uh, a whole new demographic of people came, and it almost felt like the music was for them. So then I also noticed that happening with the culture. Like right now, trucking, kabaddi, uh, gangs, drugs, Punjabi music, it's all intertwined into one. Dharma Geet, it's all intertwined into one.
The farmer protest, throw that, sprinkle that in there, you
Yeah,
know?
exactly. It
Right.
all becomes one kind of subculture, and in that you have good and you have bad, but the part about the bad is the appropriation of gangster thug culture or this enchanted Punjab that never existed. Like think about
Yeah,
it. If when somebody lives in Beverly Hills, do they move out to like nowhere? No, they don't. Because when you're in those prime places, people have worked for generations to get to those places.
yeah,
Now, what's happening in Punjab? People are exiting, right? It's a mass exodus. So if it were that great, would your ancestors not have stayed there? Would my grandfather, who's
exactly.
actually whose grandfather was actually from a privileged family on my Dadiga's side, would
Yeah,
he have left? Would his chacha have left in 1937 to go to Scotland? My baba at least went in 53. But the point is, no, because the infrastructure and what was there wasn't that great. So when songs like Rangla Punjab came out and everybody had this, I'd see all these uncles get drunk and jump around. I'm like, yeah, okay, you're jumping around for an ideal that you probably couldn't even afford.
and
And
it
people,
never, maybe never existed, or it
it,
existed in glimpses, you know?
exactly. And that's like the whole thing. Like all these guys are on these tractors. But when I went to Punjab, my Tayaji said to me, he goes, and I'm just gonna say it bluntly because it is what it is, right? Doesn't mean
Go
anything.
for it.
He
Yeah,
goes, ਅੱਜ ਕੱਲ੍ਹ ਜੱਟਾਂ ਦੇ ਮੁੰਡੇ ਬੇਇੱਜ਼ਤੀ ਸਮਝਦੇ ਆ ਟਰੈਕਟਰ ਤੇ ਚੜ੍ਹ ਕੇ, which loosely means that the sons of farmers find it an insult to be sitting on a tractor. So that was in 2006 that I heard that, right?
yeah.
And I go, okay, so what is this? What is it that I'm going to take forward? I that Punjabi culture that I saw through that lens of being born in England doesn't exist because it's evolved as people have evolved. I'm in Toronto. We have our own subculture here, and even that was evolving. And but I saw it evolving towards the thing I was telling you, and there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, I love Diljit. There's a lot of singers out there, a lot like you mentioned Gippy Garewal. I love Carry On Jatta. Like I
Yeah.
these are all aspects which I have imbibed. But this then goes into what I wanted to establish and what I wanted for my kids. I had to do a lot of research to come to my answers. Now I've got answers, and some of those answers totally decimate the narrative that we come across at the Gurdwara, on TV shows, in Punjabi newspapers. Like I'll give you one of the biggest ones, the Dasam Granth one. Everybody wants to debate Dasam Granth. How many of you can actually tell me what's in Guru Granth Sahib Ji? And don't sit there and start with the little things here and there, because the thing is, anybody who starts looking at it very deeply will see, will have to start looking at the literary devices, would have to start looking at the multilingual perspectives that are involved, would have to start looking at the ontology and have to start looking at the theology behind it. And it becomes mind blowing. I mean, even up until today, I'm still finding texts written in the 17 and 1800s explaining Gurbani. So when you hear from people that our history got lost, that's crap. It didn't
Mm.
get lost. It's just the emphasis of what people are looking for may not have been there, or they haven't cared to find it, or the people who've created the narratives, like you mentioned, the thing about the Gyanis or the Pais at the local Gurdwaras, they've got a message that they have to give out because that's what they're mandated to do. So now I'm going to go back to the purpose of the museum. My kids, I knew at that time when I started it, I didn't have kids, but I knew that when
Yeah.
my kids are born, Canada is going to be their birthplace. But because they look different, people are going to wonder who they are. I wanted them to have a set of resources which puts their identity and places it in Canada. And the experience of Sikhs in Canada. One thing I want to share with you and for the whole audience here, minorities have the right to vote because of the fight that Sikhs made in the 1940s in Canada.
Okay.
All minorities. But this isn't something people talk about. Now, the only
Yeah.
problem with my comment here is you're gonna have people then turn around and say, "Oh, that's great. Singh is king." No, you know what? Stop with those quips. I'm sick of it. I hate these sound bites, right?
Yeah.
People want to sit there and do shabash. You do a little bit like, okay, I've got I work for a consulting company. I'm what you call an agile coach. Guaranteed somebody's going to turn around and say, oh, I'm a consultant, because it sounds better than an agile coach because they won't know how to explain it. Similarly, somebody works in a pharmacy, they become a pharmacist. You know what I mean?
I've
It's
seen that happen directly. My dad probably still thinks I'm in med school and some residency or something. I'm a nurse, just to throw that out there.
right.
But Dr. Saab, get that Dr. Saab.
And
That's how it goes.
and no, and that's and that is the culture that's being perpetuated. And I think part
Yeah.
of that also comes down to a feeling of having to try to prove yourself.
Yeah, and to me, it's just I cringe so much at it that I can't bring myself to do it. But I've seen people directly do it where they'll tell me something and then they'll talk to my parents or something, and just because they know maybe their parents will hear back about it, they have to say like, "Oh, I'm a PT aide. I'm actually a PT now that I'm talking to your parents." So I'm like, "Okay, it's weird. I personally don't care, but I'm just like I make a note of it. And it's a little strange to me,
Mhm.
but
And
live your life."
it's like that. It's like, okay, so you'd mentioned the bucket sing thing. It's something that I've never grown up really focusing on. It's something that when
Sure.
it's important enough, I do have to mention it to people. And then all of a sudden, other people want to cling on to that. But it's like, what have you done? Forget about what have you done. What have I done
Exactly. Yeah.
to live up to that?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right? And if that legacy hasn't inspired me to do something beyond myself, then what am I really doing? So when it came to the museum, what we've actually managed to, I'm going to give you a few of the things so you can get
Yeah.
an
Yeah.
idea. We discovered the first grave of a Sikh in Canada who fought for the Canadian for Canada during World War One at a time where they were trying to get rid of Sikhs. There weren't that many, there were only a few in the thousands. Um, they were trying to get them to go back to India. This person who wasn't even granted citizenship chose to fight for the country. There are 11 people that we know of. There's actually more than that, but that's World War One. And what we've done is we've gotten all their attestation papers, we've documented their history, et cetera, et cetera. That way, when the racist folks come around and say, well, have you shed blood for the country? Actually, we have. We
Yeah.
shed blood for the country when you're trying to kick us out. So that's the reality. What we also did was we worked with our local governments at the equivalent of your state level to get this during, we have Remembrance Day here.
Yeah.
On Remembrance Day, you sit there, you're coming from a military background, you must be aware of it. We honor all the fallen soldiers.
Sure.
And
Yeah. Memorial Day. Yeah. For
Memorial
us.
Day. So what we've done is we've created packages and mandated it through legislation that teachers can actually go to this resource set and share the a more complete picture of who's actually involved in the military. Like we have this one famous poem in Canada in Flanders Fields where the poppies blow. Every kid recites it on the equivalent of our Memorial Day. What they don't know in history is that if it weren't for the Indian battalion or the Indian contingents which came in, 100,000 people had come in, of which 75,000 were sick. Something
Hmm.
that's that high was sick. And they captured the first German flag. They are the ones that got us through Flanders Fields. But when you
Wow.
actually look at it, it's always going to be the Anglo-Saxon looking individual, the white guy who they show. And there's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong, but it needs to be complete. It's not
Yeah.
wrong that white. No, I mean, it's look at the country you're in, look at who the majority are. It's
That's,
not
of
that.
course, there's going to be whites fighting, but just give us a complete
It
picture.
was a complete picture, exactly. Because then what we wanted was every kid who looks at that to then go back, ask their family, and through that, what we started doing was Remembrance Day ceremonies, and we had people who'd fought. One of my friends, Diogenes, fought in World War II. He was honored there. I'll tell you a cool story about this. There's this one. There's a firefighters convention going on right beside us, and we have soldiers right now who are sick, who have the star and who are Polke study, Savat Surat, full thing in the army. And this firefighter came in and he saluted them, and he walked around and he goes, I had no clue. He said, I had no clue. Have you heard of the Victorian Cross? Victorian Cross is one of the highest honors you could get. And
Got it. Okay.
collectors, it was given by the Queen. I think there were 9 that were given to 6. And one of my good friends actually has the badge of one of the soldiers. He'd sold it. One of his descendants sold it, and this guy picked it up. They held at a Gurdwara the first. So the way it usually works when they do the Remembrance Day ceremonies, they'll do the ceremony and then they end it off at a church. For the first time in history, a few years ago, they did it at a Gurdwara, and that was the first time that it was at a place that wasn't a church.
Oh, wow.
Soldiers came in, they sat there throughout the whole ceremony, but there's 50 of them. They went into 2 lines. When they saw that there's a Victoria Cross there, they all stood up, saluted it, walked out, and everybody was shocked. And these guys were like, you guys had people who won the Victoria Cross. And I'm
Yeah, it's like, of course we did, we make up a big part of the country, but it's just like, wow, of course.
And the whole thing is, I want their kids and my kids to be talking at that same level.
Yeah.
We have to level the playing field, and the leveling of the playing field
Yeah.
is just opening up the doors to see how we've all contributed. So,
And in that way, like it's a huge step towards real equity in that country, in Canada.
in Canada, and it's also recognizing each other for more than the boxes that we pigeonholed each other into.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
this isn't about that. I
So,
mean, it's happened with every community whenever they moved off into any other foreign area. You first stick with what you're familiar with, and then all of a sudden the culture evolves and
yeah,
a lot of intermixing
language
occurs.
evolves, everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the
So
one thing that kind of comes to mind with, you bringing up obviously, the military heritage amongst Punjabis, Indians in Canada. What I'm obviously I spent time in the military right out of high school, and we have something, the Desi Veterans Club, and it's going to be Americans that served in our military coming from Desi background. Um, we obviously want to foster and really just like have something documented, like all these people that served, but unfortunately with the way that at the time it was created and the way America is really just kind of heading politically and socially, the climate of that group has basically become very conservative, right wing, and it's something I've had to unfortunately step away from. But there's always a fear of that. But from what you're telling me about Canada, that obviously that's not the case. It creates more dialogue, which is it's kind of refreshing and it's nice.
so the
Or
thing
at
is,
least that's the hope that you're going for.
well, and I want to give credit where credit's due. I mean, you've got a bipartisan political system there where it's Republican and Democrat in the
Yeah, yeah,
States. We've got a 3-party system where you've got like the centralists, which would be equivalent to the Democrats, but they could be a little. They're just left of center, sometimes a little bit right of center. Our right wing, it would be the conservative, but they are like many of the Republicans. But then we also have the NDP, and the leader of the NDP is Amritdhari Sikh,
mhm,
Jagmeet Singh, a name
yeah,
that's famous. And the Liberals actually had Navdeep Bains as the official registrar. So, when people get welfare checks, etc., or we get our refunds, his signature goes out on that check. And it's been that way for a while. And he was the Minister of Innovation. In our Conservative Party, or the equivalent of the Republicans, we have Tim Uppal. And he served as a minister as well for years. The thing is, everybody has a different perspective, but the fact that all 3 of them have found their niche in each of those places, I think is incredible, because what it does is it makes us accessible, and it makes people accessible for the dialogue. The
Mhm.
problem is that it's the mindset that you want to make sure, no matter where you sit. Like, I've noticed a lot of the people who I grew up with, whose parents were originally liberal, went to conservative when they became richer because they wanted to pay less taxes.
Yeah,
You're not going to knock somebody in that sense, that that if, let's just say, they're an orthopedic
it
surgeon,
fits their lifestyle.
yeah, because who they know and what they're about is that, and that's what's going to suit them. And they're
Yeah,
going to think, okay, well, if I'm paying out of my pocket for everything, why would I not want to reduce the amount of taxes I pay? Right or wrong, that's just the mindset.
it
But
happens to everyone.
yeah, it's the ideology behind it. So yeah, I can appreciate what you're saying. I want to tie this back now into what we did, what we
Sure.
documented. We documented history and anything having to do with Sikhs and Indians. Mostly, when you say Indians, large majority were Sikh, uh,
Yeah,
and what their experience was in Canada. I thought it was extremely important that we highlighted a lot of the females and their contribution. I would even say, go to the extent of saying that it was one female who has actually been the reason that all our history got documented, because she had to fight to own her, buy property in a city in Canada called Kelowna, which is on the interior of British Columbia. Uh, when her father died, they had to relocate, and the only way you could buy a house at that time was if you had a white Canadian buy it for you. And she was 15, 16 years old, born in Canada, and she goes, no, I'm not going to let that happen. So she fought against that town, or against that city, and eventually she was able to buy a house. At
amazing.
this
Yeah.
day and age right now, the mayor of that city is descended from Sikh grandparents. I think his dad was also like Sikh Punjabi, and then his mom may have been not Sikh Punjabi. And but the whole point is his last name is Sikh Punjabi last name, and he's now a byproduct of how the community all came together. And
Right.
and doesn't mean that tensions aren't there, but it's probably not um, in any type of extreme form, if you understand what I mean. Like, that people don't get killed, et cetera, et cetera. What
Yeah,
I'm interested
yeah.
in my kids is for them to understand their place within Canada and within a larger framework of history. When it comes to Punjab or their Sikh history, there's a lot that I can point them to, because that's what I spend my time doing. But I also wanted to do something outside of my own immediate interest, to sit there and establish something for them. And every community needs institutions. Uh, Facebook groups, they are institutions of a sort,
Sure. Yeah.
right? It's just that when you actually have an institution that has um, a physical space and is engaging with larger communities, like we got an award from the city of Mississauga Museums for our museum. And we've done work with them. We've given them stuff. We've curated for them. We curate for schools. We've added things into the curriculum. We've done things which embed us into a larger framework, so we become part of the larger social fabric. This is one of
That's
the
amazing.
problems.
Yeah, tangible change. Yeah.
It's tangible, and people will know, okay, it's the museum. We put out a poster which actually went national because it had Harjit Sajjan, who was our ex-military veteran affairs minister, and Sir Johnny MacDonald, the first prime minister equivalent of president of Canada. And in 1867, Sir Johnny MacDonald made a tongue-in-cheek comment to his friend when he was coming over from England, saying, send me an army of six. You know what it was over? There was a fight over California. And he said, if you send me an army of six, we can take California and make it part of the British Empire. Because at that time, Canada wasn't a country.
Yeah.
And then what we did was, that poster ended with him saying, leading an army, a Sikh leading the Canadian army.
Yeah.
And
You gave me one of those posters, I
yeah,
remember.
and the thing is, that created a lot of dialogue, and it allowed us to sit there and say, look, what we're saying is that we look at Canada, but through a sick lens. We're Canadians, but we see Canada through a sick lens. And even the leader at that time of our, like the equivalent of who's the Republican leader right now.
Oh my God, I can't even tell you.
Okay, yeah. So whoever the official opposition was, right? He'd actually quietly listened, saw that there was community building, nation building going on, and he goes, "You know what? I love how you guys said that. It's Canadian history through a sick lens."
Yeah,
And I go, "Look, this is somebody who everybody wanted dub as being right wing, blah 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 blah. We didn't get that from him at all. We didn't
yeah,
get it from him at all because what he saw was people eagerly trying to connect, and we have every right to, right? Because this is where we are. This is what we're invested in. So that goes into the question now of kids.
yeah,
Okay, so my kids will be free to do what they want to do, but whatever I
of course.
expose them to will be part of what their upbringing is. So whatever we do, I'm going to make sure that it's fun, but that it's also informative. And I'm going to be encouraging them to question because I'll be facilitating learning. Faith, for me, I do Bart, and my eldest, who can speak a little bit now, understands what Bart is, and then he'll smile because he identifies that with his dad. And as he gets older and older, I'll be explaining more and more of it, but how it applies to him, not as something that he has to try to strive to. Like one of the things I actually hate, it's going to sound really bad, is I hate when people say, "Oh, he's got a good heart, he's a good person." What does that mean?
Hmm.
It's just like saying someone's nice. It
Yeah,
actually
yeah.
has nothing tangible that you can say. It's just like a fuzzy, fluffy type of thing. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be getting my kids to self-reflect, iterate, adapt, but also know kind of what the general framework of Gurmat, which is the thinking behind Sikhi and how I've understood it. And then I'm going to have them sit there and discuss their experiences with me. And in doing so, I want them to connect their experiences and they can teach me.
Yeah.
And if it helps to make their life, like for me, if you were to ask me as a Sikh, what would be the simple thing that connects me to everything? It comes down to start off with Gam Karo Lo Moh God, uh, lust, anger, attachment, and greed. And these
Mhm.
five qualities being things which take away from your peace of mind, which then made me think that that state of oneness, which is attributed to its own God, oneness which resounded and expanded, which is what I am, must be that feeling, that state. And will you get there? Will you not get there? Doesn't matter. But as long as you're on the journey and you're actually journeying towards something and you're effectively retrospecting as you go along. This is a lot of my agile talk coming in, by the way.
No, no, it's okay. It's
It's
okay.
because that's what I live day in day out, right? So
Yeah,
it's it's that's how I want them to engage. I want them just like I've built my own connection
yeah.
with my faith, and I've been part of everything, right? Meaning been I've been exposed to subsects. I've been part of a cult. I've been with people who've been part of cults. It's been crazy. I've seen a lot, but it's made me really figure out where I fit in. And I realized who I am is who I am, and I will adjust depending on where I am. But what I stand for and what drives me, that inner volition, for me, it's connected to good body.
Absolutely. Thank you, but I wanted to say it looks like you took real big steps in, creating a more, I guess, what is it, pluralistic environment in Canada for your kids. And what I like is you're kind of embedding the veracity in your kids to just kind of be independent. And I know that gets used way too often nowadays, but it it sounds like you're getting to like the authentic truth in that word and really trying to instill it in your kids and as well. And I respect that a lot from
Let
you.
me share something about this.
Sure. Yeah.
Because this is something from history. So there's a person in history that people aren't fond of. His name is Khem Singh Biddi. He was a descendant of Guru Nanak, 13th generation. You have to read the other side of his story. So that's how I work. If you tell me somebody's bad or that they were the enemy, I try to see what the virtue was in that individual. Guru Gobind Singh did that in Zafarnama with Aurangzeb, right?
Yeah.
He actually listed out all his virtues. So I sat there, I said, okay, let's first engage with people on where their virtues are. Khem Singh Biddi was asked at this time in the 1800s, he goes, now that Sikhs are going abroad because people are going to Japan, like Professor Puran Singh, he's a brilliant guy, love reading his stuff. He quoted Walt Whitman at that time, right? Like in the early 1900s, like this guy was like really with it. He's one of the few people who I do kind of go back and read often. But getting back to it, Khem Singh Biddi made the comment when asked, "What's going to happen when people go abroad and they have to get married, and they get married to people of different faiths? What if they marry somebody who's a Christian? What's that person going to be?" He goes, "There'll be a Christian Sikh." They go, "What if it's a Muslim?" He goes, "There'll be a Muslim Sikh."
Yeah.
He goes, "Well, it's a Hindu if you're in the South." He goes, "It's a Hindu Sikh." He goes, "What do you mean?" He goes, "It's those abstracted principles of humanity which makes one a Sikh." So there was always that openness. It wasn't something that was narrowed down to
So
an area.
rigid. Yeah.
Yeah. Which to be honest is just mostly a diasporic immigration kind of experience. When people move abroad, they want the comfort, they want to know what they know and feel comfortable in what they know. And you never know how much angst they're feeling from being far away from what they were familiar with.
Yeah.
And
That's
then people
just
like you and I
not to go off topic, obviously, but I always empathized with my parents for, their kind of what they wanted for us. I think obviously it's not just my parents, a lot of, Punjabi Sikh parents and Indian parents in general, they have a hard time, coming to grips with a lot of, interracial marriage and whatnot. But I feel like you said, that you never know what kind of angst they're feeling and what kind of really longing they're feeling to, their homeland and their, like we talked about a romanticized Punjab, obviously, like maybe in their mind, they wanted to move forward and not just live in a romanticized Punjab back then, but bring that here. And obviously, like when that doesn't play out, it can be very difficult.
yeah.
Yeah.
And whatever the ideal is, like I mean, sometimes people feel that they haven't met the success, and that's why they have to go back and establish their success in their villages,
Yeah.
one way or another. I mean, it's something that
Got a
happens
bunch.
across Punjab, right? We see that with all those
Yeah.
gates outside of the villages and the soccer balls and the airplane tankies.
Yeah. It's all good. Won't get too much into that, but any last minute thoughts that you have, Harry?
One thing I would say to everybody is you are who you are, and you're going to evolve into who you're going to evolve into. Just make sure it's organic and it really does resonate with who you are. And some of it will be outside of the scope of what, your family or your peers want of you. Other parts of it is just your own discomfort. But the sooner you embrace that discomfort and you're more comfortable in who you are, the quicker you'll be of service to humanity and society, because you will be that example of resilience that others look towards.
Thanks a lot for your time, Harry. Looking forward to getting this out there. Thank you so much. Guess we can stop the recording.
Cheers, man. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Scott.